I've got a little spiel prepared. So yeah, evening everyone. Welcome to our first Low Traffic Future webinar. I'm really pleased you could join us tonight. For those of you, those who may be new to Low Traffic Future, we're an alliance of individuals and organisations calling for transformative change in how our roads, streets and transport network are planned. We've got a simple vision, really. We want it to be easy and enjoyable to get around by walking, wheeling or cycling, and for public and shared transport to be cheaper and more accessible. This kind of change obviously isn't just good for the climate, it's good for our health, communities, the economy and our environment. Low Traffic Future is hosted by Transport Action Network, who campaign for more investment in buses, rail and active travel together. I am recording, Roger. Yeah, we're all good. Yeah, on that front, thanks for checking. For sustainable transport and health, the road safety, planning and the natural environment, to join our voices in support of a less car dependent future. We've recently been focusing on how best to support local groups because we know that's where much of the real change will happen. Over the last few months, we've been listening to campaigners, communities about what issues they most want help with. The clear front runner was how to communicate the case for reducing car dependence, how to persuade decision makers, politicians and local communities to take bold action. So that's the focus of our first webinar this evening. Looking ahead, just quickly, we're also going to be helping groups to make the case for reducing car dependence in two important contexts. First, in the run-up to next May's local elections and the mayoral elections, and second, in shaping a new generation of local transport plans. With the government's current planning and devolution reforms, there's going to be an opportunities to better join up transport and land use planning, we hope, focusing new developments around good public transport and helping to protect our countryside. So we'll talk more about that towards the end of the session. A little bit of housekeeping, not expecting any fire alarms. You're all at home, so you can take care of that stuff yourselves. But usually we would have allowed sort of a hands up and a bit more cameras on, but it's been amazingly subscribed. Over 160 people registered, so we've taken the decision to leave cameras off for everyone, and we're going to use Slido for people to ask questions. I will pop a link to that in the chat shortly, although it is on screen actually there. If you point your camera at that QR code, you can ask questions there. You can give thumbs up to other people's questions, and I'll collate them at the end. I'll put them to Izzy and Roger as well. So we'll be all finished by 9 o'clock at the latest, and yet we are recording the event, so if you have to dash off early for any reason, you can I'll circulate that towards the end. So let's get started with the topic tonight. I'm really delighted to introduce our speaker, Izzy Romilly, sustainable transport researcher and campaigns manager at Possible. Izzy will be sharing insights from Possible's new work on winning over both politicians and the public to the benefits of tackling car dependence, from cleaner air, safer streets to stronger local economies. So Izzy, I'm going to stop sharing that and it's over to you. So do you want to say hello and then start sharing your slides and take it away?
Amazing. Yeah, thanks, Ed. It's really nice to be here on this webinar and just to have the chance to talk to so many people about traffic reduction. Probably something that a lot of people on this call know a lot more about than I do, but I will do my best to to talk about some of Possible's learnings and this short new campaign that we're about to launch which we've called Stuck in the Slow Lane, for reasons that are hopefully obvious. So I'll try and share my screen. Let me know if this works. Oh. Is that looking like a presentation?
It is. It's just loading up, but
great.
I think we're going to be all right. Yeah, you're okay. All good.
Cool. I can't see both tabs at once, so if there's any like reactions, questions, etc., I won't see them. So do just interrupt.
Yeah, of course, no problem.
Great. So as I mentioned, at Possible, we're about to run a short campaign which we're calling Stuck in the Slow Lane, how traffic is holding Britain back. And what we really want to do with this campaign is essentially keep the kind of fundamental goal of traffic reduction and better access to transport on the national agenda, to package up a lot of the data on co-benefits, and to call for some kind of big picture solutions as well. So this webinar is part of that. And yeah, very grateful, Roger and Ed, for the chance to talk about it tonight. So in this presentation, I'm going to cover a bit of the national political context and the need in terms of traffic reduction. a bit on the co-benefits and popularity, but I won't spend too long on that because I think it's probably really familiar stuff for a lot of people on this call. Some of Possible's learnings from over the years and kind of ideas for change that would love to kind of get your thoughts on as well. So yeah, I'll be drawing on kind of lots of Possible's work from over the years, from well before my time. So credit to lots of my colleagues, Car Free Cities team. And yeah, when we launch this campaign properly, we'll be sharing a written briefing which links to the work of many other organisations who are kind of working in the sector and on similar topics, which we've drawn on. And yeah, I think as Ed mentioned, there's questions on Slido, so do feel free to put questions and comments in there, and hopefully we can get to them at the end. But so for those who don't know us, we're Possible. We're a climate action charity. We've existed in one form or another since 2009. And our vision is a zero carbon Britain, which is built by and for everyone. And we call for fair solutions to the climate crisis that improve our lives in the here and now, whether that's through cleaner air, lower bills, closer social and community bonds. And we focus on 4 areas of the net zero transition, where essentially working with people, households, communities, and public engagement is really important. And the reason for that is that a lot of the work that's been done on decarbonising our emissions so far has happened kind of above the heads of most people. It's in terms of cleaning up the energy supply. But actually, the majority of emissions reductions that we need to make on the road to net zero now do involve some level of public involvement or behaviour change, or at the very least, like public consent and awareness. And so, yeah, we exist to make the case for the quality of life and the equality benefits that come with that. So, yeah, we work on transport, we work on flying, homes and energy, and what we buy. And when it comes to transport, our vision for the places that we live is not one that doesn't have any cars at all. We recognise that a lot of people do rely on cars, whether it's because of mobility or work or kind of lack of access to other options. But it's places that are free of the dangers, pollution and emissions of mass private car dominance, where public transport is affordable, accessible, widely available, where walking, wheeling and cycling is a safe and easy option for everyone. And there are less congested roads for those who need to drive. So a vision that's feels very much in line with the low traffic future. And so to bring this to life, traffic reduction needs to be desirable, it needs to be well understood, and it needs to be publicly linked to all of the co-benefits that we know will come from traffic reduction and having better alternatives in place for everyone. And we need targets and policies in place nationally and locally that can realistically deliver the level of traffic reduction that we know that we need. But back to the here and now. So we know that high levels of car dependency are bad for all of us, and poor access to alternatives, especially the most marginalised and those without cars. So there is so much that could be said on this, but just a few examples, which again are probably not going to be new to anyone on this call. There's 5 million people in the UK who are living in transport poverty, many of them because they don't have a viable alternative but to pay the costs of owning and running a car. A nationally representative study from Bikers Best found that just shy of half of car owners in the UK said that they had no choice but to own a car. And new research out last week found that even in London, where there's really good access to public transport costs were causing social isolation and mental illness. And we know that for lots of groups, there are many additional barriers. So, for example, 71% of disabled people said they'd like to be able to use more environmentally friendly types of transport, but they don't often have a choice. So, kind of continuing on that theme, our access to transport is deeply unequal. So how much and how easily people get around is already tied to income, to ability, to ethnicity, to gender. And the disparities are not just about the distances travelled, but also the emissions that are produced by different groups. So very similar story to flying, in that when it comes to driving and surface transport, it's typically the richest who travel the most and produce the most emissions. But then on the other side, it's also the harms of car dependency, or at least mass car dependency, that are really unevenly felt as well. And we know that goes across everything from air pollution to collisions, to the burden of the cost of alternatives. And that kind of research that's referenced there at the bottom kind of says that, you know, even worse than that, that current government policy risks making these gaps even bigger if it doesn't focus on a fairness-based approach to decarbonising transport, which is also the fastest way to decarbonise. So I think the kind of picture with transport, it feels like there's a really kind of two-sided kind of problem where there's lots of people who have very poor access to transport, but at the same time, you know, lots of people who have kind of almost unlimited mobility, and we have kind of very high national transport emissions as well. So I think a lot of this is like very frustrating and really appeals to our innate sense of fairness, which I think is really, really important when it comes to communicating about traffic reduction and making that progressive case for sustainable transport and for everybody having access to better alternatives. And I think when you look at this in the context of the amounts of money that are found for very carbon intensive projects like Heathrow Airport expansion, or the Lower Thames Crossing, which I know Transport Action Network's done so much work on. Yeah, it's a very frustrating picture. So basically, to move on to the national picture and the need to tackle traffic. So on the one hand, transport is the single biggest sector of UK emissions, and it's the one that needs the steepest cuts from now to get to net zero. So lots of other sectors have made quite good progress since 1990, but transport has kind of been a bit more slow to get going. But we also know from the balanced path to net zero from the Climate Change Committee that we need a miles driven per capita to remain below 2019 levels all the way to 2050. But a lot of wider analysis thinks that actually a much more ambitious level of traffic reduction is needed, whether that's a 20 to 60% fall in the absolute amount of kilometres driven, and that modal shift away from vehicles will actually bring down emissions and deliver co-benefits for the economy, for health, and for nature as well. So most emissions reductions from driving are due to come from the switch to electric vehicles, but obviously that essentially ignores all of the harms that and the risks that come with the transition to electric vehicles as well. So at the moment, based on the latest set of road traffic projections from the Department of Transport, we're planning for an increase in miles driven anywhere between 8% and 56% by 2060. So a big increase in traffic. And obviously we know that building new roads is not the solution and only entrenches car dependency in the long run. I think probably it speaks to successive governments not really wanting to talk about the I guess the kind of behaviour change angles of this, and seeing the switch to electric vehicles as the kind of, I guess, maybe the easier option. So if we're kind of heavily relying on a transition to electric vehicles to bring down emissions, then there's just a couple of other like confounding factors that we need to think about as well. So one of them is vehicle size. So we know that cars are getting bigger and bigger. That's been going on for decades, and actually new car sales are now dominated by SUVs, which are linked to higher levels of pollution and like greater levels of danger for other road users as well. But there's also the rebound effects that will come from the transition, or may come from the transition to electric vehicles. So because of the incentives and subsidies associated with electric vehicles, it may be that people drive more because the cost of driving comes down and driving becomes more appealing as an option. And then there's also some kind of international, like kind of emerging evidence that actually people who've invested in electric mobility, whether that's electric cars or electric cycles, actually travel more miles than they did before, which I think is really interesting as well. So just going to move on to the co-benefits of modal shift and more sustainable transport options. And again, I don't want to spend too long on this because I think this stuff will be really well known to a lot of people, but we go into a lot of detail on this in the briefing that we're going to release in the next few weeks, with a lot of links to other work. So clean air, obviously we know clean air is linked to tens of thousands of deaths every year. It's really linked to health inequalities, people of colour, people on lower incomes, the oldest and youngest, are the most affected by air pollution. And it does come from tyre and brake wear, although electric vehicles are obviously much, much better. So yeah, the kind of co-benefit of clean air and the public health gains to be made there are really significant. Physical activity, again, an amazing health intervention, and both access to active travel and to public transport stands to boost physical activity, because most public transport journeys begin or end with some kind of activity. Fewer casualties. I'm just always amazed that this doesn't get more, I guess, more airtime in the media. The amount of kind of preventable casualties on the roads. So, I mean, 130,000 casualties a year, 4 people killed every day on the roads, and 80 seriously injured. In London alone, I mean, it doesn't quite feel right to put this in economic terms, because it's a very human issue. But in London alone, we calculated that the cost to society of serious and fatal road collisions was £1.2 billion a year. So you can imagine what that might look like across the country as a whole. In terms of nature and climate resilience, I mean, the kind of car-dominated neighbourhoods are not well set up for either for extreme heat or for flooding resilience either. So in cities, one of the most effective ways to make neighbourhoods more resilient to extreme heat is to plant trees. That's very difficult when there isn't a lot of space, but planting trees in car parking spaces as opposed to on pavements is a really good way to bring down temperatures. And again, there's more to be said on the links to local economies, footfall, spending, isolation and loneliness, and also the lower household bills that could come with making public transport more affordable as well. So I guess quite helpfully, it's kind of nice to be reminded that actually there's already consensus that no one wants more traffic on the roads. That's like very, very consistently true. There's loads of polling to support this. So yeah, I think we should all kind of take comfort from the fact that we don't really need to make the case that less traffic would be a good thing, because I think most people seem to like very strongly feel that already. When you ask people if they do or don't want more traffic in their area, the answers are very clear. So this is DFT survey from 2020, which found that, again, like the majority of people support or strongly support traffic reduction. And in the 2024 LTN review, again, like people in surveyed areas, the majority said that traffic congestion and traffic fumes were serious or very serious or fairly serious problems for them. Again, like we commissioned some polling in 2023 that found that more voters were annoyed by cars than by traffic calming measures. So again, just to say that there's lots of examples of consistent polling, that the kind of case for traffic reduction has kind of already been made. And then there's kind of, this applies among specific groups as well. So 90% of licensed taxi drivers that we surveyed in a survey that I'll come back to a little bit later, 90% of licensed taxi drivers wanted to see fewer cars on the road. And in recent work by Sustrans and Transport for All, 58% of disabled people supported taking steps to decrease car use in urban areas and to reduce congestion, speed up buses, and make active travel easier as well. So there's a lot to be said on this. But basically, despite this kind of consensus, obviously, like change is happening, but it often feels like it's not happening fast enough. And there's probably lots of reasons for that. There's the kind of, I guess, the growth narrative. Again, the fear of the kind of behavior change and being perceived to maybe be telling people what to do or to be restricting their choices. And I guess kind of all of that compounded by the kind of risky political times that we're living in as well. So moving on to some of the lessons from Possible's work over the years. So maybe the biggest one is that change is hard and opposition is inevitable. This is always the case. It doesn't mean that all opposition is the same, or that some of it is not worth engaging with, but there is always opposition to all kinds of change. my colleagues have talked a lot about the Goodwin curve, which is named after Professor Phil Goodwin, which essentially says that even though traffic reduction is very, very popular in the abstract, actually once the details of specific schemes or ideas to achieve it kind of come to light, people tend to kind of go, whoa, what's going on? And there's often a bit of panic, uncertainty and fear of change. But often, or usually, almost always when changes are implemented, support builds up after time, and after 2 years, the desire to basically no one wants to go back. So there's lots of examples of this, but just a few are London's congestion charge, which was wildly controversial. It was likened to the Berlin Wall. There were legal challenges. There was a lot of kind of vocal opposition to the congestion charge, despite the fact that 90% of Londoners thought that there was too much traffic and were worried about the health and environmental effects of that traffic. So we've seen kind of relatively similar story with ULEZ. I've put the kind of indoor smoking ban in here as an analogy as well. But I'm sure you can find lots of examples of this. So I think that kind of points to a probably kind of universal truth, is that we don't like change, but it's very difficult to see the problems with how things are now. And the status quo tends to be, it is at least familiar, even if it's not perfect. And so when we imagine things being different, our aversion to what's called loss aversion can be very powerful and can activate a real kind of fear of change, and can do a lot of can be very effective in mobilizing people against change, which is perceived as threat. So I think it's also important to recognize that support for change is often conditional on perceived fairness. So just looking at some work from CAST, the Centre for Climate Action and Social Transformations, I thought these findings about fairness and climate action were really interesting in the context of traffic reduction. But I think there's so much kind of unfairness embedded in the transport system anyway, that I think kind of making the fairness case for sustainable transport is kind of always doable. But yeah, some of the key findings were that we're highly attuned to whether or not we think climate action policies are fair. And I think maybe kind of given the cultural context, I think maybe that's even more true with transport, where it's become such a kind of such a big issue in terms of perceived fairness. Again, like a lack of choice is perceived as unfair, but practical support can mitigate that. Yeah, I think that's really interesting in terms of the framing of traffic reduction as often being something that is fundamentally about restriction, as opposed to more freedom to get around in different ways. And again, I think that case is quite easy to make when you look at the lack of access to other options. That's like the reality for so many people. And yeah, there's I guess kind of important to recognize as well that it's not just about outcomes, but also about process, and people's experience of process is really important for determining whether or not they feel that the process has been fair, as opposed to the outcomes and the decisions that are made. So I won't say too much on the others, because I think they're maybe a bit less relevant to transport. But yeah, so another finding is that we're much more likely to support change when we can see a vision of what it actually looks like. So just one example of this is a visualization of Hyde Park Corner. So when we did our Car-Free Cities work, when we asked people if they thought Hyde Park Corner should be pedestrianised, just under half of people agreed, so they thought that'd be good, and more than a quarter of people disagreed. But then once people saw an image of what it could look like, support shot up and opposition fell. And maybe that's a kind of similar story to the kind of Goodwin curve, that once people can actually see what change might look like, actually it's often not as bad as they might have thought. There's also the kind of fact that a lot of us underestimate local support. So just one quote from Ian Walker on this, which I'll give you a minute to read. But I think, I don't know who to attribute this to, but that phrase, like pluralistic ignorance, has been used a lot to describe the fact that because people are maybe unwilling to speak up about something that they think other people are not going to support, and they maybe perceive themselves to be an outlier, they're less likely to say something, which means that lots of us who actually think traffic reduction is a really good idea might be less likely to say so, because we feel that we're going to be more of a kind of, I guess, like a social outlier than we actually are. So yeah, these points around visualizing the change and kind of normalizing change is why we've run car-free challenges in 5 UK cities now, so most recently in Oxford. And big part of that project was not just supporting a group of people who drove multiple times a week to try going car free for a month, but a really important part of it as well was also the storytelling that came out of it, and making sure that those people had the opportunity to speak to people in their community or in the media about what their experience had been of trying to go car free, and switch up their options, and hopefully inspire other people to do the same and overcome some of that that sense that you might be the only person who is thinking about this stuff, or that it might be kind of scary when you see like a positive example of someone else doing it. It's a lot easier to imagine doing it yourself. And so yeah, we tried that challenge on a national scale as well. So this is a bit like Veganuary. People around the country could sign up to do this car-free challenge where they tried not to drive for a month. And most people actually, maybe surprisingly, really enjoyed it. And only 5% didn't. And often those 5% had additional barriers that were often related to being in a rural area. And very pleased how many people decided to use their car less going forward coming out of that challenge. And yeah, I mean, I guess maybe there's something around kind of messaging as well. And we were obviously quite surprised to see that challenge picked up by GB News and kind of like framed as a positive thing. But I think there's lots of different kind of messages and angles that around kind of in the general subject of traffic reduction that can be picked up by different groups. And in this case, the kind of weekly saving one was popular. And then something else that we've tried to do a lot, if possible, is to work in partnership with other groups. We don't want to be a climate charity that doesn't, speak to other people who are not working on climate. So we want to like build consensus and shared paths forward. So just a couple of examples of projects that we've done that on. So about a year ago, we launched Cabbies for the Climate, which platformed London taxi drivers who were interested in supporting and celebrating the transition to zero emission capable vehicles and to kind of standing up for clean air and for climate. And in a survey of nearly 2,000 drivers, again, we found that 90% wanted to see fewer cars on London's roads. And so as a result of that campaign, we've now got a shared policy platform with the LTDA, who represent licensed taxi drivers in London, which we're really proud of. And again, another example of this, we worked with care workers around the country to explore their experiences of transport and to call for targeted electrification schemes to help people in rural areas get electric cars. And again, maybe a group who are kind of not as represented in the climate conversation as they should be, but are massively at the sharp end of a lot of the issues around transport. And we kind of came up with a kind of policy idea that we could all get behind, which was great. So just to move on to my last few slides, wanted to leave with a few ideas for change, but yeah, for discussion as well. So number one, the Future Generations Act in Wales. I don't know if there's any campaigners from Wales who might have any like thoughts or reflections on this call about whether this has been effective, but I think at least on paper, this is a really amazing world-leading piece of legislation that basically says that whenever public bodies in Wales have to make major decisions, they have to consider the well-being of future generations. And and that's led to Wales introducing a modal shift target and to the kind of default ending of new road building as well in favour of investing in public transport and active travel. So yeah, I think, yeah, it sounds like an amazing piece of legislation to me, but if there's anyone from Wales who has any thoughts on it, I'd be really interested to hear them. Road user charging. So this is a kind of, I guess, an expanded like local or national almost congestion charge that would apply everywhere and essentially replace fuel duty. So yeah, probably a lot of people are really familiar with the idea of road user charging, that quite a lot of organisations have done some work on. But it's essentially calling for a levy that would replace fuel duty. And a fair and progressive form of road user charging would look at all sorts of factors. So whether or not someone had other options, how congested the area that they were driving in is, maybe what time of day or the week they were driving, how polluting or how dangerous their vehicle is, and apply basically staggered charges based on that. And I think there is a sense that because government revenue is falling, because of the transition to electric vehicles, more people getting EVs, fewer people paying fuel duty, which has also been frozen for more than a decade, actually the government is going to maybe have to look at revenue raising ways of doing something like this. And then so redistributive policies, and again this kind of gets at the real inequalities that exist in transport. So yeah, we'd just like to see money raised to invest in this transition to sustainable transport through taxing kind of unnecessary excess emissions, whether that is ultra frequent flyers or whether it's SUVs or what. So this is not necessarily like a traffic reduction issue, but definitely an access to transport issue. We're calling for targeted electrification schemes for high mileage car dependent drivers. So again, rural care workers, taxi drivers, delivery riders. And there's, yeah, I think there's so many reasons why this would be a really good way of supporting the transition to net zero within transport, because yeah, it maybe would support a lot of people who can't afford to switch their car, maybe in lower paying, more insecure work, but actually because they're doing really, really high mileage, then stand to have a really big impact on emissions and air quality if they change their vehicle. So yeah, we'd point to a scheme in France that did something quite similar, that basically meant that people who had to drive for work and were below a certain income threshold could rent a car from the government, an electric car from the government, for about €100 a month, that included all of their insurance and maintenance costs. And so, yeah, the dent that could make in people's household bills while making a real difference on emissions would be really great to see. And obviously, this kind of goes without saying, but a revolution in public transport and active travel for everyone. Obviously, that looks very different in different places. But yeah, too many people just still do not have good enough affordable, accessible options. And last but not least, traffic reduction targets. This obviously is not a solution in and of itself, as we've seen from examples of places that have introduced traffic reduction targets and then not been able to make a lot of progress on them. But I think having an explicit traffic reduction target in place is still a really important tool for, I think, for public awareness, for shifting opinions, and for accountability as well. So yeah, we'd love to see traffic reduction targets nationally, locally, regionally as well. And I think bang on time at 8:35. That is all from me. Thanks.
Very good. Brilliant. Thank you, Izzy. That's cool. Rog, you can come in as well if you want, if you can. Yeah, wow. National traffic reduction targets. That's the dream. Yeah, will we ever get there? Yeah, we'll wait and see. I've had loads of questions coming in, so yeah, it's really, really good. The way I'm going to run this, folks, is I'm going to do a bit of a Q&A and bring in Roger as well, who's a long-time campaigner and really knows his stuff. So I'll sort of be the master of ceremonies and just chuck the questions at both of you, if that's okay. So I'll just hop in. I've tried to sort of rank questions myself, really, as they've been coming in, but I've seen there's been lots of thumbs up too. There's a really interesting one from Rich that says you say support for change is conditional on perceived fairness. How do we deal with social justice opposition to change, which are mostly misrepresentations? So I thought it was a really interesting question. I don't know if I might be like out of context here, Richard, but quite often like disabled drivers are used as like reasons for not moving forward with active travel schemes, for example. So I'm wondering if that's the kind of thing Rich is talking about. Izzy, could you talk a little bit about that initially, and then Roger might want to come in?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is probably one of the most important questions about this stuff. Like, how do you, when people are all coming from a good faith place of wanting everyone to have better options, how do you get to a place of consensus, especially when people have different interpretations of the data? I think, yeah, I mean, I definitely am not claiming to have any like big answers on this, but I think again, it is really important to talk about the data. I think there is probably I think having good data and making sure that the discussion is like respectful and data driven, and includes like different perspectives, I think is really important. And again, I think there is a difference between process and I guess kind of outcome, because I think if we, if the majority of us agree that traffic reduction is a good thing, I do think there has to be like a process that makes people feel heard and included in that. I think when there's kind of bad faith, that's a kind of, and there is like deliberate disinformation or just kind of people just fundamentally do not want traffic, that I think that is like that is a kind of completely different scenario. But I don't know, I would like to think that enough people are genuine about wanting to cut traffic that we can get to a place of kind of finding consensus on ways forward. I think a lot of it is maybe to do with building those bridges as well. So working with groups who are affected, doing things with other groups, and I guess that that does take more time, but I think can be probably really important for getting to a point where there's kind of consensus. I don't know if other people feel differently, but yeah.
Roger, do you want to unmute and come in on this one?
Yes, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think you're right that the various sort of voices in the media who want to hold us back in the sort of progress we want to make will often exploit that concern for fairness by highlighting the disadvantages, perceived disadvantages on particular groups. And I think you just got to be wary of when people with privilege start getting very concerned for the plight of people without privilege. Just look for, what are they really up to? Just be suspicious. I think the point about disability is particularly interesting. We've seen this so often with the whole kind of low traffic neighborhood debate, but this is going to sort of be this is really going to deprive people with, disabled people of their ability to get to their houses and so on. Well, disability is there are such a range of types of disability. Disability can, some people with disabilities some people have disabilities that make them very car dependent. Others have disabilities or health conditions that mean they can't drive and are very dependent on being able to get around in other ways. So it cuts both ways. And so, I mean, I do think it's worth talking about sort of equalities more generally, and remembering that when equalities also includes children, and women and people from disadvantaged backgrounds, people with health conditions who often can't afford to work and are therefore also facing multiple forms of deprivation. But as I say, it's particularly thinking about children and young people. And if we talk about the fairness of the system overall, it's just bear in mind the complexity of fairness. And it's not straightforward, but we shouldn't be hoodwinked by people pointing to one particular group who might suffer. We do need to think about it, but let's not forget that actually overall, the sort of world we want to create, it would be a fairer one overall.
Yeah, and I was heartened, Izzy, to see the work that you've been doing with London cabbies, because traditionally there's been a bit of friction there between campaigners and taxi drivers, but it seems like I was really happy to see that work. So yeah, do you want to riff on that one a little bit, because that was great to see?
Yeah, sure. So this is a campaign that our director Hera came up with, basically in conversation with Steve at LTDA, who's basically kind of, for those who don't know, like a membership body for London, and a kind of representative group for London's licensed taxi drivers. And I think where it came from was basically the kind of just knowing that cabbies are often stereotyped, they're often weaponized, and they're kind of held up as a group of people who are going to be really disadvantaged by a lot of the kind of shifts towards sustainable transport. And I think typically there have been quite, anti-ULEZ sentiments, etc., among a lot of cabbies. But that's not to say that all cabbies feel that way. And it's also not to say that there aren't elements of sustainable transport that actually really benefit taxi drivers, and actually which they're really up for getting behind. And so we spent quite a lot of time together over the last year, basically, talking about our priorities. We didn't agree on everything, but there was a lot that we could agree on. And I think to get to a place where we have a set of policies that feel, they work for all of us, it's kind of, I think what I love about it is that it feels like the just transition in practice, because there are a lot of things that could really disadvantage people who drive for work. Like cabbie numbers are going down. The price of an electric or zero emission capable, technically, taxi is much more. It can be £100,000 once you've included interest. So that's kind of like the scale of like what it costs to transition a taxi. So I think if we can, put money into making that transition easier, supporting people who are self-employed, across lots of different sectors, I think that's great. And again, like we wouldn't agree on everything, but there's enough that we can agree on that, like it's great to be able to work together.
Cool, brilliant. All right, I'll move it on to a couple of questions, which you talked about Wales towards the end, and we had a couple of questions. One around asking for help around kind of replicating what the Welsh have done on their default 20 mile an hour limit. So Roger, I might ask you to talk a little bit about our discussions with Rod King and his work, but also maybe one for you, Izzy. I don't know if you've seen it. It depends how plugged into the news you are, but I know today there was some news around Cardiff's potential parking strategy for higher parking charges for SUVs and heavier vehicles. So are we increasingly looking to Wales for inspiration, and how quickly can we sort of learn these lessons in England?
Do you want to go first, Roger, and then I'll
go on? Izzy, you go first.
Okay. It was great news. So Possible's part of the SUV Alliance, which is doing amazing work, led by lots of other partners on raising awareness of the harms of SUVs. And we've done some work on advertising as well, which basically looks at the kind of the role of the advertising industry in kind of dependence on fossil fuels and high carbon products, of which SUVs are a really, really good example. Obviously, like, the evidence coming out about SUVs, the danger, the pollution, has really been ramping up over the last year or so. There's been some amazing media coverage that in lots of different parts of the media, which is really heartening to see. So they've done it in Paris. Obviously now it seems to be happening in Cardiff. So yeah, why not here? It's definitely something we want to see in London for sure. I'm only referencing London because it's where quite a lot of my work is based at the moment. But yeah, we'd love to see it in lots of places. Whether it's something that the government would embrace, again, because of that fear of maybe interfering in people's choices, is another question. But I'd love to see it.
Cool. And Roger, do you want to come in on the 20 mile an hour stuff?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think you mentioned Rod King 2020 for us. I'm very keen to get Rod King to come and do a webinar at some point, because not just on the case for 20 mph, but also on the lessons learned in terms of the campaigning strategy he deployed. I think working his way through kind of building up local groups who each badgered parish council after parish council until the county council came round to it, was a really effective strategy for just building up the overcoming that perception that everybody hates 20 mph, everybody hates speed cameras, everybody hates restrictions, when it's just not true. And that, overcoming the pluralistic ignorance that Izzy referred to it earlier, that this myth that everybody hates 20 mph, and actually if you go to parish councils and they all kind of say, no, there's huge support for 20 mph in our community here. And Oxfordshire and Cornwall have both followed exactly that strategy, where they sort of said, right, here's a pot of money, if the parish council wants it, we'll implement 20 mph in whatever villages the parish council says we want it. And frankly, given that the Labour in England has kind of got cold feet about various things, not least sort of the whole kind of running away from the idea of clean air, but also looking at the political costs to Labour in Wales of having done the 20 mph, I think we're going to have to sort of be patient and just go with that kind of community by community approach for a little while. But actually, it's worked incredibly well with both Oxfordshire and Cornwall. When when the Conservatives were sort of saying, yeah, we're going to tie local authorities' hands, stop them doing all this 20 mph stuff, and it was Conservative councillors in Cornwall who were saying, but our communities want it. That is a very strong position to be in.
Definitely, yeah. 20 is plenty for us. Place to go for that info. Really inspiring work.
There's a lot of campaigning strategy lessons from them too. We'll come to that another time, I'm sure.
We will, yeah. Rod's on our list of, and maybe some of his campaigners on our list of folks to do a webinar with. So yeah, watch this space. Really good question from Rachel around how likely is it the local authorities and major employers who, in brackets, who create major congestion will get traffic reduction targets. So I'm sort of interested, so like where I live in the northwest in Wirral, a lot of traffic focused around the hospital, partly staff and visitors as well. So do you think we'll ever get to the point where specific employers, like major employers, could be not hit with targets, but kind of set targets themselves and work hard towards achieving them? What do you think? Izzy, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a lot easier to imagine for public bodies or even for really big companies. Sorry, there's some really loud animals outside. I really hope you can't hear them, but they're quite distracting.
No. Okay.
Yeah, I think I think it's a lot easier to imagine for public bodies, like you say, like hospitals, NHS trusts, like local authorities, but also for really big companies where, I don't know, you can maybe exert some pressure on the kind of, corporate social responsibility kind of side. I think, I mean, I have to say, I find it quite hard to imagine that level of I guess, kind of targets being, I don't want to say imposed, because maybe that kind of feeds into like the narrative of this stuff being kind of foisted on people, but I think modal shift targets for major employers, I think, would be a really, really positive thing. But also, I know a lot of other people will have done a lot of work on the kind of planning side of it. I guess there's a lot of kind of collaboration that's needed in terms of boosting public transport access, making sure the infrastructure's in place for people to get to work by active travel. So I find it hard to imagine targets, but again, I would love to see it.
Yes, a couple of thoughts on this. Firstly, I mean, I think it's going to take a little while to kind of really get targets, sort of, national government saying, come on, local authorities, you all need to be setting targets. We've found 5 examples of local authorities who've set really good, ambitious targets in their local transport plan. I'll ping a link to a document we produced with 4 of them. We discovered a 5th one recently. The question then is, so what do those local authorities who've set a target, what do they then do to get local authority to get local employers? And there are 3 levers. One is, if you like, just simple PR, kind of just playing on their desire to sort of be good citizens and all the rest of it. And Izzy's right that sort of pressure works best on public sector organisations. I would have thought the big one that would be a really, really big win would be the NHS, which is not just Britain's but Europe's largest employer, and has an obvious reason why it would be in their interests to be leading by example of promoting healthy transport options. So yes, the idea of the NHS becoming a sort of setting some modal shift targets, and then the health staff who act when they are themselves walking, cycling, using public transport more, and then seeing patients and able to encourage their patients to sort of take up active travel based on their own personal experience. That would really change a few things. So that's another one. The last one is potentially the use of the planning system. When local authorities want planning permission, that's a point when the local authority has some leverage to say, right, okay, well, if you want to build in that location, you're going to have to sort of put some measures in place and commit to those measures and be held to account for those measures, because if you just do nothing else, you build in that location, you are going to create some additional traffic, all the problems associated with traffic on the roads, and we can't be dealing with that. So you've got to put some measures in place, use the planning system to enforce that.
Indeed, and we've got a webinar in December coming up around just that topic, really. So yeah, watch this space on that one too. We've got 5 minutes really, so I just want to try and amalgamate a few questions while I can. There's a couple of two ends of the spectrum. First of all, someone's asked if we can define transport poverty and what that means, and then I'm also wondering if we can also combine that with our rush. We do need to rush towards electrification of cars as well, so we're going to have a lot of EVs, which I haven't got one yet, but I believe if you're able to charge it at home, you can dramatically reduce your transport costs, which is a great win for the individual, but it's not going to be great for traffic potentially. Even when we're all in EVs, there's going to be more traffic. So definition of transport poverty, and then if we could have a bit of a think, both of you, around potentially more traffic from cheaper cars to run.
Yeah, on transport poverty, I know for some other measures, I think there's like a quite a technical definition. So it's something like, X% of your income spent on, let's say, rent after taxes, etc. But yeah, my understanding of transport poverty is that it is about basically not being able to access all of the opportunities and the things that you would like to do because of the cost of transport. So in that sense, it's quite a kind of vague and open definition, but I think for capturing the sense of like limitation and exclusion that comes from transport poverty without putting a specific kind of number on that, I think it's quite helpful. And then yeah, should we come back to the EVs one? Roger, do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just in on transport poverty. There's another term, transport related social exclusion, which I think is broader. It's not so much about sort of what proportion of your income gets spent on your transport. Transport related social exclusion is not having transport options available, and the most authoritative piece of work on this was some work done by Transport for the North, which came up with, if I remember right, 21% of people in the north of England, which is basically the northeast, northwest, Yorkshire and Humber, faced transport-related social exclusion, and it documented, what that is. How they defined it, I can't remember, but I will, before the end of the session, I'll go and seek out the link to that report, because it's a very useful piece of work.
Cool. And Izzy, on the coming kind of Carmageddon of electric cars.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one, because I think on the one hand, if you do need to drive, obviously getting an electric car is great, and like I say, one of the things that we're calling for is for the government to be a lot more targeted in the way that it sees that transition to electric cars. At the moment, it's a bit of a free for all. If you can afford it, you can do it. There might be some like very, very specific schemes. I know there's some NHS schemes actually, for example, that aim to increase access for people who need to drive, like district nurses, for example. But I mean, just the kind of electric car grants that came out, I think it was about maybe a couple of months ago now. It was basically money off new cars for people who wanted to buy a first-hand electric car. I just saw so much commentary from people, from other people online saying like, you could have outright bought all of these people an electric cargo bike for that. And I do think there's something to be said for kind of thinking in a much more targeted way. Like ideally, if we're going to invest and put loads of public money towards the transition to electric vehicles, at the very least, that money should be targeted at people who are doing the highest mileage, who are on the lowest incomes, who have the least access to other options. I think that's why groups like, taxi drivers, like rural care workers, delivery drivers are kind of yeah, would really appreciate schemes like that. So yeah, that's on electric cars. And then obviously, I guess just to say that obviously the transition to electric cars is not going to solve all of our problems, and actually it might make some of them worse. So yeah, I think we do need a lot more of a focus on modal shift as well, just for so many reasons: health, economy, nature, etc.
Yes, I just quickly add, I know you're going to want to wrap up in a sec, Ed, but clearly, you know, there are huge problems, and as you point about the sort of budget implications, not only is the government or future governments increasingly over the coming years at risk of losing the fuel duty, the income they get, but they're also going to have more and more problems because, as Izzy said, switching to EVs reduces the running cost of a car. That means that there will be more people wanting to use a car. It becomes much more likely. Izzy talked about how the range of future forecasts for the growth in motor traffic is from 8% to 54% by 2060. And if we do nothing else other than switch to electric vehicles, we will end up at the 54% end of the spectrum. So now, before people start increasingly getting kind of just taking for granted the lower running costs of electric vehicles, now is the time to make the case for road pricing. Before, while electric vehicles are still basically seen as sort of a relative luxury that the sort of wealthier people are able to afford the upfront costs of buying an electric vehicle, before everybody starts taking advantage of the lower running costs, and then it becomes much harder to make the case for road pricing once, you know, if we you know, once the horse is bolted.
Definitely. All right. Yeah, cool. Okay, last very quick question before I wrap up then. Izzy, I can't remember the slide exactly, but it was to do with some of the work you've done around the country, helping people like have a month without a car or go car free for a while. Because Josephine has written about survey responders not always realizing that if we do want to reduce traffic, then it's going to have to be them or us quite often. That because it's quite easy to tick a box in a survey, isn't it, to say, oh, I'd love to get the bus more often, or I'd love to cycle to work, but then to actually do it for people is a bigger step. So it was really happy. I wonder if you could just talk quickly about that work and whether you found that people, how easily they manage the shift to other modes.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, this is the car free challenge, which Possible's run in 5 different cities. We've done it in Bristol, Birmingham, Leeds, London and Oxford over the last few years. And essentially it starts off with a kind of like quite intensive research phase where we recruit, you know, 5 to 10 people from very diverse backgrounds, like living circumstances, but all of whom use a car multiple times a week. And then with a lot of support, they have a 3-week period where they try not to use their car at all, and they embrace public transport, sometimes electric car clubs if they really need to, but focusing on public transport and active travel. And yeah, I mean, I worked on the Oxford one, which was last year, and it was really, really interesting that, you know, people did experience various barriers and teething problems. For a couple of people that was really difficult, and it was often people who had mobility issues, or they were often traveling with like several children, but most people really enjoyed it, and actually it was the kind of positives rather than the negatives that they took away from it. And I think maybe part of that was to do with the fact they had a lot of support to do it, and they had the kind of social support, the practical support, incentives. But yeah, I mean, people talked about just the kind of range of things that people took from it. It really surprised us, or really surprised me anyway. So, you know, people really enjoyed the physical activity, but it was also things that you wouldn't expect, like people feeling a much stronger connection to the city, the place that they lived, or having like more quality time with their family members, and actually that being connected to the modes of transport that they were using. People feeling less stressed because they weren't spending time in traffic, all of those things. So yeah, maybe we'll hope to run another one in the future, but it was basically a way of helping people experience the benefits. And then we ran a national challenge as well that was more like a kind of Veganuary or Sober October, where anyone around the country could sign up and try and do it kind of on their own and let us know how it went.
Magic. Roger, do you want to add anything to that before I wrap things up? You okay? Right, we're pretty much on 9 o'clock now, folks. So I'll wrap it up. Izzy, thank you so much for your time and your the efforts you've gone to put that presentation together. Before I kind of do it for you, is there anything you want me to mention in terms of links I can mention to, or places I can point people to for Possible's work?
Probably just our website for now, but you can sign up to our mailing list. And yeah, we'll have a few more bits and pieces kind of coming out in the next few weeks. So yeah, thanks a lot for having me. Really appreciate it, and hope everyone enjoys Celebrity Traitors right after this.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's on, isn't it? All right, cool. Well, very quickly then. Yeah. So I'll share an email with everyone that's registered with a link to the recording of this. Izzy, your slides, if that's okay, I'll link to those so people can have a look through. And yeah, if anyone does want to get in touch, particularly around our work around local transport plans, then please do feel free. Just reply to the email that comes out to you. There's a few upcoming events that I just want to flag quickly that we've got. So Monday, the 3rd of November, 8 o'clock, we're going to have hopefully a smaller group where we can discuss how Low Traffic Future can support groups in campaigning ahead of the local elections. It might seem like quite a way off, but it's going to come fast. So we've got an event for that. I might try and limit it to maybe 30 or so people so we can all get involved. We've got another webinar like this coming up Thursday, the 4th of December, 6 o'clock, to talk about tackling car-dependent new housing with Jenny Raggett of Transport for New Homes. And after the new year, we've just found out and just booked it in that we're going to have Stephen Frost, the former head of transport policy at IPPR. I think I might have done one too many P's there. Sorry, Stephen. But we're going to explore how to communicate the case for traffic reduction effectively to both policymakers and the public. So that's coming up in January, Monday the 12th. That is. So yeah, more webinars in the future too. So we'll keep you posted. We're very happy to host online meetings for small local or smaller groups of people from the same locality to share ideas on the local transport plan stuff. So drop us a line on that. And finally, a quick reminder that all our events are free, and it's also free to join Low Traffic Future as a member. So you can just go to lowtrafficfuture.org.uk/take action. And if you like what we're doing, get involved, and you could even donate to us as well. There should be a button on the website for that. So that's it. Thanks everyone for taking part and coming along tonight. I hope you found it useful. Special thanks to Izzy and everyone at Possible for sharing their insights. And that's it, folks. We'll look forward to seeing you at a future event. Okay, take it easy. See ya.